Welcome back to Hot Rod Guy Garage, and this is going to be another episode on the Ford Torino build and the 300 Inline 6. Hopefully in this video we'll get putting this motor together today, so follow me along through the intro and I'll be back. And alright guys, it's Saturday morning here at Hot Rod Guy Garage, and our friends over at Super Clean wanted me to do a giveaway, so we're going to do that in this video also. So to get entered into this giveaway, which is going to be for a foamy Super Clean original and the spray of the original, like they sent me in my other review video. So what I want you to do to get entered in this giveaway, go down to the comments below. Let me know what your favorite project car is on my channel. Like this video, share it with your friends, and let's see if we can get it up on the YouTube algorithm and, get this project some recognition. So what I'm going to do, everybody comments below and likes this video, I get notified. I'm going to put everybody in another video on a random, little spinny wheel thing. And we're going to pick somebody random. I'm going to do that live. So make sure you get entered down below in the comments. Hit that like button. It's, over here, probably about right here. So today, we're going to try to get this 300 6-cylinder together. I've got the SVO out here warming up because I'm going to drive it today. And I know a lot of people are waiting on a video on it. I've got some stuff I have to do to it, guys, and I've just been so busy otherwise that I've not got to do it. So probably let's shoot for next weekend. I'm going to try to get a video out on the SVO. I need to put a roller camshaft in it. I need to put a set of valve springs in it, set of valve seals, because it does smoke when it's started up, but that's not what this video is going to be about. So stay tuned for that. So I got to head by the bank, drop a little money from this week in there, so I got some money to spend on this 300. So I gotta go get some assembly lube because mine's at the shop, and I might as well just leave it there and go buy a new bottle. That way I've got one here at the house too. So let's get this day started. Well, this ain't going well so far. I guess they don't have no Ford engine blue anymore. I don't know. Now, like I said, that's pretty disappointing. Now that I'm in the car where it's warm, because it's cold today because Tennessee weather. I figured I'd just stop by AutoZone since it's right down the road from my house and get some dark Ford blue engine paint. Why I was getting stuff to put this motor together. And they didn't have none, so I guess let's try advancing over alleys and see what they got. Well, you can see it got me took care of. Well, after driving all over town and trying to get 2 cans of Ford dark, Ford engine blue, and a couple cans of brake cleaner and some RTV, end up at O'Reilly's, getting that super discount that's not a super discount on my shop account. So yeah, so let's head home and see if we can get started putting this motor together before it's dark. Alright guys, that was a lot of running around for not a little gain, but I did get what I needed to put this motor together. So when I got home, I've been home about, 20 minutes or so, I remembered that I left those bolts in that rust remover, that was in the bucket, down there. Well, I pulled that stuff out, get it washed off. It's out here on the floor drying off. I spray it with a little penetrating oil to keep it from re-rusting, because that's the thing with chemical rust remover. You gotta neutralize it with water, and then, you end up with stuff rusting back. So I'll flip it around, show you what I got. So guys, this stuff come pretty impressively clean. I mean, for no word. Some of this stuff still got some heavy crust down in the crevices and stuff, and you could probably agitate that and drop it back down in there for a couple days. But check out the exhaust flanges. I mean, that's pretty impressive, and it cleaned her stainless up, you know, pretty decently too. But the biggest thing was this pulley. This thing was bad crusty where the belt rides, and now it's just got this little small spot that I can knock off with a little piece of sandpaper. So I'm gonna let this stuff dry out, because some of this is our engine bolts, our oil pan bolts, cylinder head dials, stuff like that. So I guess the big thing is we'll start off by checking our ring gaps. So good. Basically, anytime I build a turbo or nitrous motor, or even the NA motors can be ran hard, I get my rings. So this is the set I got for the 306. This is a standard sized plasma moly sealed power set. I usually like to use sealed power rings when I'm building the motor. Then I want to last. Sometimes you just don't have a choice, and you know, you have something like a Hastings ring or something like I put in the Geo motors, because that's literally the best ring that's kind of available for them. So the big thing is you want to find your top groove and your second groove compression rings. These are what's important with the ring gap, and we're going to get those out in the bore, and I'll show you that process, even though I've covered it in some of my Geo Metro building, engine building videos. So the process is absolutely no different with 306 than it is for a big block Chevrolet or a big block Ford or a small block Slant 6 Chrysler, you know, Hemi, you know, down to your little lawnmower motors. This process is absolutely no different. So let me flip it around. So guys, what you do, you're going to take your piston ring, right? This is going to be our top ring. And this video is probably going to be a little shaky because I have y'all sitting on the motor on the engine stand. So what I like to do, I usually leave an old ring in a piston. But what you can do if you don't have an old ring, you can take and push this ring down in the bore and square it up by just minding your groove around your piston and trying to keep it even. So I can already see that these have a rather large, wide gap in them. So most of the time with these aftermarket rings, you're going to end up with more than a plenty amount of clearance. But it is something I always like to check, and I will check every cylinder. This is going to be a super high boost motor probably in the end. So I'm going to at least want a 30 thousandths top ring gap. There is a formula and math to this, but generally on stuff that I'm going to try to push 30 plus pounds of boost in, I like to see at least 28 thousandths. So I got a 30 out here because I know this gap is wide, and it is literally 30 thousandths, at least in that bore. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to check all 6 rings in this number 1 bore, and I'm going to come over here, check all 6 rings in number 2 bore, check all 6 rings in number 3, 4, 5, and 6. And what I'll do, I will, when I find one that's tighter or I find one that's looser, I will save it for whatever corresponding bore. Like I said, I usually like to see 26, 28 thousandths on the top and second ring gap on a right at a 4-inch bore engine for a high boost application. Super important, especially when you're going to run a cast piston like these stock ones. If these rings butt, it's game over. So I'm going to go through this process with this top ring, and I'll come back when we get to our second ring. And alright, what I've done, I went through and I matched the wider rings to the narrowest cylinders, so to say. They're all right at 22 thousandths right now, which is a little tight. But you also got to keep in mind that as these rings wear, they will open up slightly. And I'm probably going to have to file fit these. So the important thing is when you do this, guys, you want to keep your rings to the bore. And this can be a hard way to do this. But if I wouldn't have went through this process, we would end up one with 30 thousandths, and if you would have called it good, then you would end up with 22, 22, 22, 22, 22. Now, these 5 are super consistent. This one was a little wider, and I think it was more the piston ring itself than the bore. So I could went through here and dial indicated all this stuff, but because this is a budget build, it's not meant to last forever. So I'm going to try to keep these in respective positions with their bores. These are still top rings. And I'm going to go to the second ring and I'm going to measure them out. And then I'm going to go through the process of filing these rings. So guys, you could totally just slap all this stuff together and wish and hope and, then blame it on the motors not being strong enough when it goes pop. So I'm going to make sure I've got an appropriate amount of ring gap, since I know what I'm going to do with this motor. Now keep in mind, it will, at the point of no name nationals and probably the point where I'm going to turn this motor up, it will have a fair amount of wear on it, hopefully, because I plan on driving it. So let's get them second rings, let's check the gap on them, and we'll go from there. Alright guys, pretty much went through the same process. And as you can see, I marked a couple of these rings with paint pen on the inside, not on the sealing surface. And that stuff had to be cleaned off, but had a tight ring and a loose ring again. I moved them from bore to bore, and that evened them up. So all these are 22 also, which is just a hair tight for what I want. Now, a lot of you will say it'll wear in. It probably will, but it's still just a hair too tight for my personal likings. So there is a math formula for ring gap to bore, for force induction and nitrous and all that stuff. And all this stuff changes, guys, when you go to super high boost. You want wide ring gap. So that's where cast pistons and a forced induction application get a bad name, because people just throw them in there and throw a turbo on them and try to crank the boost out of the frame and wonder why it blows up, and then blames it on the motor being weak, or the pistons, or the connecting rods, or what have you. So I'm going to sit down and do a little math real quick just to verify what I said earlier is what this 300 needs. It's still a 4-inch bore, and that don't change anything in the grand scheme of things. So I'll be back here in a minute. Well, guys, while I was sitting here, FedEx actually showed up with the rest of my Rock Auto parts order, so I'll flip around and show you what I got. So I seen that Felpro had a severe duty gasket, which is basically their race style head gasket with stainless fire rings and stuff. These are a lot better head gasket than stuff comes in your normal engine gasket sets, and it was pretty cheap, so I went ahead and ordered one of those. Anybody curious on the part number, it's a 525 SD. Also got my oil pump here and my new oil pump shaft from Melling. At least they're still made in USA. But opened up, and the magnet in this thing was, Grand Prix. Just like Project Phoenix's donor car was. So that's pretty cool too. Add it to my Rock Auto magnet collection. And alright guys, this is why you should always double check your math. And, for stuff. I've done the math, and the recommended is 0.006 thousandths, okay, per 1 inch of bore. With a 4-inch bore, you end up about 24 thousandths. Actually, it does end up at 24 thousandths. We're at 22. So I could go ahead and file that 2 thousandths off with a very fine hand file, or one of the spinny ring gap tools, which I do have, but I've owned it for 10 years and actually never used it. Unfortunately, it's not here at the house. So I'll probably hand file these, the other 2 thousandths, and then know that in the first few hundred miles of break-in that these will probably open up at least another 2 thousandths, because they are brand new rings with a fresh hone on the bore, and that stuff will wear in. So I could call it good, and it would probably be good, but I don't know if it's worth taking a risk. Let me know down in the comments below what you'd do. Alright guys, I decided to just go ahead and file these. I'm going to gap them at 30. I want that safety margin. And I got out my little super fine antique hand file that my grandfather had, to build, stuff like this. And what I do, I'll hold these rings square, in my finger, and I'll just lightly, and it don't take much to take a few thousandths off, guys, but I'll lightly just, file this ring, watching as I go on both sides. I'll touch them, because a lot of times what you run into with these rings, and I'll show you here in just a second, is they're not totally flat on these ends. Even though they should be, they're totally not. So what you're trying to do, most times, is take the defects off of them. So I've already done that on cylinder 1 and 2. So I'm on cylinder 3 now on this second ring. I'm going to go back and just touch the top ones, just to make sure they're flat on the ends. And I'll flip it around and I'll show you kind of midway through the process. Because this thing is super fine, guys. It takes a little while just to do it. Unlike the little hand spinny thing where you squeeze the ring together and you turn a little wheel with a cutoff wheel in it to do it. So, like I said, just hold your ring square as you can and just touch it, guys. And I'll actually, hold this in where I'm actually filing on my finger too, and the ring. So, you just got to make sure that you hold it flat and square. And that's the way I do it. I know you probably can't see right there, but there is actually, I'll flip around and turn on macro. That way y'all can see. So guys, I'm sure you can see the shiny and dark spot right there. And that's because that ring is not flat. You can see it's touching all the way up there right here at this corner. And we got a big old, open spot down here. So, So guys, that's pretty much the gist of it. I'm going to go through here and gap all these rings, somewhere between 28 and 30 thousandths. It will cut down on its lifespan, as far as ring wear goes, quite a bit. But I'll have that extra assurance that I have plenty of ring gap when I crank the boost up on this thing. So a lot of y'all probably thinking that I was going to put together some kind of low boost, type setup. So that is not the case. So if we're going to run 28-10-5 and no name nationals, we better have our game on point. So I want to make sure we don't bust the crowns off these pistons. So it takes a little time. I'll probably file on these things for probably 30 minutes. Word a tool, if I would, go get that other toolbox, would, cut this down to probably a 5-minute process. So, but it's also easy to get way out of line with the tool. So I'm just going to touch these, make sure all the ends are flat, and I'll go from there. Alright guys, it's a little while later. I got all these rings gapped and, all that good stuff. And as usual, the lights are making the video blurry. So I got one rod and piston that I put the rings on. I'm just going to show you that process. I mean, it's super simple, guys. Basically, I'm putting all the rings on my pistons first. And then we'll roll this thing over and put the crank stuff in it. And we can actually start on the bottom end. A lot of you may be confused why I start with the rings first, because it is the most time-consuming process of the whole engine assembly. So, let's get to it. So, as always, you're going to start with your oil ring expander. And then you got a lower and an upper oil scraper. And it don't matter if you put the top side on first or the bottom side, but always make sure you stagger these gaps 180 degrees from each other. So this one's here where my finger is. So we're going to put this one over here on this other side. And just a light spiral. Get down there. You just want to make sure it moves freely. Second ring. These things are marked with a top. So top means it faces up. So once again, just a light spiral. And that rings on. And probably should spray it out with some brake cleaner first, but this is where we're at. So top ring don't have no markings on it. It's just a rounded ring on the back side for the piston side, so it can go either direction, and just a light spiral. Always like all my ring gaps to stagger each other at the 12, 6, 3, and 9 positions. So that easy, guys. So putting rings on pistons isn't a big ordeal or a difficult ordeal. And I really don't like how these lights kind of drowned out this video, but you gotta have light down here to work, guys, and this is unfortunately a byproduct. So at this point, I'm gonna roll this motor over on the engine stand. I'm gonna wipe out my main journals. I'm gonna take my bearings out of my parts boxes, and we'll get those installed. So motor's rolled over. I got the main saddles all wiped out, and anybody curious, these are the main bearings I'm gonna be using. Got them there, and I've got a set of Engine Tech rod bearings because they didn't have no cell power ones for rods. So I'm gonna get these bearing shells out and get the lower halves laid in here. Your lower shells will always have the oil hole or an oil groove in them, and that's super important, guys, because if you put the solid on the bottom, you're going to have oiling and rod bearing, main bearing problems. Because if you put them in wrong, you're not going to get no oil to your crankshaft, which means instant engine failure. So I'll get these shells put in here, and I'll be back. And just like that, guys, I got all our bearing shells seated. Put a little assembly lube on. A very generous amount of assembly lube. And now it's time for me to get my crankshaft. I'm going to wipe off all my journals and blow it off one more time. And then I'll be back when it's time to set it in. We'll get our main caps on there and run down. And then we can torque those. And then we start putting the rod bearings in the pistons. Well, rod bearings in the connecting rods. Then we'll put our rods and pistons back in the motor. And we'll be good. A lot of you are probably screaming, well, you're not checking the bearing clearances. On this motor, I am not. I'm putting a standard size bearing on a standard size crank that has wear on it. And I could check it all day long. You know, that would give me an idea of what weight oil to run. But it being a flat tappet motor, guys, I'm going to run probably 2050 in it anyway. And I'm not really concerned. As long as when I torque this stuff down, this motor spins good and smooth, I'm sure it will have plenty of clearance. And I may regret saying that, but I've done a lot of them like this in the shop setting, where they had low oil pressure. You pull it and there's nothing hurt, and you just roll a set of bearings in it and ship it right on out the door. And 99% of the time, it works great. So let's hope this isn't one of them 1% times. Because finding plastic gauge, especially locally here where I'm at, is almost impossible because they look at you like you're a spaceman in a parts store, even when you walk in with a part number. And I got our crankshaft set in here, and like I said, this crank's good and smooth. It just is discolored for whatever reason. Can't really feel anything on it with your fingers. Most of this stuff's just visual stuff. It's nothing. So keeping with the budget and, you know, cheap motor theme here, guys, as much as I possibly can, we're going to bearing slap the bottom end and, you know, the rings. So at this point, I'm ready to dig my main caps out of the box there and get those other bearing shells over there, you know, in those caps and get those on there. So your main bearing shells will always be numbered, guys, and they'll always have an arrow like this one. It's number 4. And you need to make sure that you put them on in a proper orientation along with your thrust bearing. So at this point, when you get these main caps on there, I need to get a little assembly lube put on those things and get them plopped down on there, and we'll get them torqued. So let's see what happens in about, you know, like 3, 2, 1. And just like that, guys, the main caps are installed and torqued to 64 foot-pounds. So big thing is anytime you put new bearings in, especially when you're bearing slapping it, you want to make sure that this motor turns super freely. And that's what it does. So next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to stick a crank bolt back in it so I can spin it with a ratchet. We're going to roll this motor back over. We're going to start putting rods and pistons in it. So guys, if you like these kind of videos, make sure you hit that like button, share this with your friends, most importantly subscribe because it helps the channel to grow. And as I drop the crank bolt on the floor, I get down and pick it up. So basically guys, I cover this in a lot of videos, this engine assembly stuff. So just remember, this isn't necessarily Ford 300, 600 specific, and that's why I'm kind of just glancing over a few things and kind of hitting highs where there's important stuff. You know, like those ring gaps. Those will not really apply unless you're building a max effort turbo motor. So, you know, anytime you just put some bearings in something, you want to make sure your crank's clean, your surfaces are smooth, and that after you torque everything down, everything rotates smoothly. It's not a guarantee of oil clearances, and I have got bearings in the boxes before that said they were standard and they would have an oversized one mixed in. So always check the backside of your bearings and make sure they're all stamped standard, which would be STD, where your oversized will be like 0.5, 0.1, 0.10, 20, 30, 40, etc. So, like I said, not necessarily the right way to do it, but, you know, I have faith in many motors I put together like this, and common sense tells you if it spins over smoothly and you can turn it with your hand or a couple fingers, you're good. So, I'm going to roll this thing over. I'm going to start getting my ring gap, my ring compressor tool and all that stuff out. I've turned off a couple of these lights, but it's still kind of glaring sometimes on this video, and I apologize for that, but I shoot everything off my cell phone, and that's why sometimes this stuff's shaky, because I'm holding a phone mount that, you know, it's a cheap one from the Dollar Tree, because that's what I can afford. So, let me dig the rest of my tools out, and I'll roll this motor back over, we'll knock the rods and pistons in it, and we'll dig this new camshaft out of the box here in a few. So guys, got my piston ring compressor out, my piston ring compressor pliers. You can buy a set like this from like your local parts store, guys, for dirt cheap, and they're great for doing piston rings. Light years ahead of those old twist up type little sleeve things you see in the parts store. Unfortunately, you don't really have the choice with these as you do with the twist up one to be able to do like motorcycle pistons or real small pistons like the Geo motors, and that's why you see me use it in the other videos. On V8 stuff or stuff with bigger bores, I use these and they're a lot better off. So I got my rods and pistons over there. I got to put my bearings in, and that's what brought me to this point of starting this video again. You'll notice that your rod bearings have a hole, especially on the Ford 300, they have a hole up here. You also have a hole inside your connecting rod. And what that does, guys, is it squirts oil through here up to your wrist pin. So, another thing to note, anytime that you clean your pistons and stuff, you want to lube your wrist pins real good and make sure they're good and lubed. As you can see, I'd put some assembly lube in here this morning, and they've been sitting and soaking around the wrist pins. So I'd make sure they're good and lubed. So let's start getting this stuff put together. So I'm going to start with the number 6 piston and our number 6 bore. So I'm not going to go through the process while installing all 6 of these pistons, but get my upper rod bearing in here and lube. I'm going to take some of my magic elixir stuff that I've used in other videos, and I'm going to lube these piston rings real good. Rotate them around a little bit. Then I'm going to come in here and make sure all my grooves are staggered. Like I said earlier in the video, I like to make sure all my grooves are staggered. I'm gonna get my compressor ring out here. Make sure it is pointed the right way, because these do have a bottom and a top. And this is the point where it gets hard to really video this stuff, guys, because things get messy super fast. And, you know, they get messy super fast. So your piston will have a notch. That notch faces forward. I'm going to put a little of the magic lube on our skirts. I'm going to drop that piston in here like this. Wipe my hands off because they're super oily, and for whatever reason I'm not even touching the engine stab, but the camera's shaking. So I'm just going to tap around our ring compressor and make sure it's sitting flat on the deck, and this should be pretty much, guys, it should be a pretty easy thing. But sometimes what happens is you get to this point right here, and as you can see, my ring has jumped out. Instead of just beating on this thing to get this in here, I'm actually going to push the piston back up. I'm going to reseat my compressor, because that would be the correct thing to do. Because if I was to just keep beating on this, guys, I would actually break a piston ring, and that would be very undesirable and would cause quite a few problems. So anytime you have any kind of resistance, you need to back up and figure out where your problem's at. So we're back squared again. I'm gonna give this just an extra squeeze over here. And we're in. And while it seemed like I may have been hitting that hard, I was not actually hitting it that hard. So at this point, our piston is installed. I'm just going to lightly tap this little feller on down and get him onto the main rod journal right here. So I'll be back here in just a moment. So even though it sounds like I was hitting that hard and the camera was shaking, I'm sure like a crackhead in a snowstorm, I was actually not hitting it that hard. I'm just lightly tapping. So at this point, I'm ready to put my bearing shell into my lower rod bearing cap, and I'm going to do so just like this. These caps on a Ford motor are numbered, and the numbers need to match on the same sides, because if you put this cap on backwards, guys, you're surely going to spin a rod bearing or have other problems. So I'm going to leave this motor turned like it is. I'm going to go down below and bloop, and just run my rod bolt nuts, you know, these little guys, up there with a ratchet, and just hand snug them for now until I get all 6 pistons in. Then we'll roll it over, and we'll torque them to spec. So be back here in just a moment. So I got all the rods and pistons in. I don't know if you can see them down there, but all the rods and pistons are in block. I got all the rod caps run up with a ratchet. I need to roll the motor over, and we can torque the rod caps. And then it's time for the oil pump. We'll get the oil pump stuff on it, and from there we're on to our camshaft. So let me roll this thing over. We'll get these rod bolts torqued, and we'll go from there. And alright, guys, the rod bolts on these torque between 40 and 45 foot-pounds. I have my torque wrench set to 40. So where I'm going to attack this one, I've already got 4 rods up here, 1 and 2 and 5 and 6. So I'm going to start at 1. I'm just going to ease up on this number. working from side to side. And as y'all seen in the video, I torqued every one of those twice. Always go over them just to make sure everything hasn't moved or settled or what have you. Got all those torqued. I set my torque wrench down about 18 foot-pounds, rotated the motor over, make sure it didn't click. We got a good smooth turning assembly. So at this point, we're kind of ready for that oil pump. So let me get that stuff dug out and cleaned up, and we'll get it installed, and hopefully we can get the front cover and the rear main seal and everything in this thing and the oil pan on the bottom end today and get it sealed up. So let's just plug along, see where we're at. It's still daylight outside, so I just got to shut up because it's cold outside, and that's why we get all this super bad glare. So stick with me. Alright guys, I opened up my new camshaft. I went ahead and put the oil pump on there. They're super simple, guys. You know, there's 2 bolts, bolt pump down, an oil pump drive, you know, and pick up tube. Nothing special there. One thing that did concern me when I started opening up all this comp cam stuff is it is loaded with, you know, this. Literally every package in this thing is loaded with their braking oil propaganda stuff. And I will use braking oil. You know, always use a good quality braking oil anyway, but you know, even this was attached to the camshaft. Kind of concerning. I'm not gonna lie, I had second thoughts on buying competition cam, or nowadays a comp cam, because they're not necessarily my favorite cam company. Most because they've had tons and tons and tons of flat tappet cam failures. But I thought I'd give them a chance. You know, there's not a lot out there for a 300 600 that is in stock, and that was kind of important with this. It will be 100% installed properly and broken in properly, like I do all of them. So if anybody's curious, you can pause this. This is the the camshaft that I bought. This is their 268. So it's a 219, 219 at 50 thousandths, which is a pretty small camshaft, guys. And, you know, it's only 110 lobe separation with like a 456 lift with the factory rocker arms. I do plan on using a 173 rocker arm, so that will increase the valve lift by about 30 thousandths and, you know, also exaggerate the duration of the being slightly. So, opened up time set, figured, you know, it's 300, 600, so it's got the gears, right? And it would have some kind of instructions, you know, appropriate to such a thing, correct? No, they just throw their timing chain instructions in here with no mention whatsoever to a pressed on camshaft gear. So, I mean, it's pretty obvious what's got to happen. The Woodruff key's got to go in that camshaft, gears got to get pressed onto the said camshaft, and, you know, camshaft gets lubed, and camshaft goes in motor and bolted in by its retainer plate. But just wasn't super impressed, guys. The tons and tons and tons of stop, use our braking oil only stuff, kind of, you know, it's enough to spook a person. I've never had a problem with flat tapping cam, and I don't anticipate one now, but looking at the cam core, I can see how they have quality problems. You know, the coating that they put on these things is mega thin, and it used to be mega thick, and there's tons of cast and flash between the lobes. I went in there and tried to break some of it off with pair of pliers just to make sure none of it's just going to break loose and go through my motor and trash it too. So, I don't know. So, I'm going to see if I can't get this camshaft gear pressed onto this camshaft using stuff that's in my garage, and I'll be back, guys. Well, after a little deliberation over this camshaft gear or how I was going to press it on, I was waiting and putting the block and, you know, pressed it on with the threaded hole in the center, you know, in an old valve spring retainer. Took quite a bit of force to press that little dude on there, and I had to heat the crank gear to get it pressed on. But I got everything lined up here, as you can see. It's pressed on flush, and that's on there. And it still spins over smooth, so I think we're good. I did Loctite the camshaft retainer bolts, and I did put a little Loctite around the edge of the cam where the gear's pressed on. I would really like for that to be secure. I may go through and paint the surface area in between, just for extra insurance that it won't back off. I'm sure it's a helical cut gear and its natural position, it wants to pull it rearward. And there's not really anywhere it can go, guys, but, you know, yeah, goes against all common sense thinking of, you know, race car stuff. So at this point, I'm ready to put the front timing cover on it and rear mainsail and the oil pan. It's starting to get dark outside, so they give you a pretty good indication it's been an all-day ordeal. So plan was get this thing sealed up tonight, at least the bottom end of it. We're going to take the deck up and the lifter area and get this block painted. That way it just don't rust anymore in my garage. Even though, you know, while it is dry down here and temperature controlled, it still has a tendency to sweat if you leave the door open too long. It's cold today and supposed to be hot tomorrow, so I'd like to at least get it sealed up best I can. So let me get busy, and I'll be back here in a few. I'm going to go upstairs and wash my hands before I start messing with gaskety stuff and RTV and things like that. So give me just a few and I'll be back. And no matter how much you mock stuff up and fit stuff, try to prevent fitment issues. I guess the new oil pump has the pickup tube clogged a little bit, so I had to modify the pickup tube slightly. And then when I finally got my oil pan all lined up, even though I've had it on here before and we know it's all warped all to pieces because it's cheap, you know, aftermarket pan. But there was one issue that I half expected all the ball holes to be lined up. And guess what? Yeah, we got one that's blatantly not ever going to fit. So I got most of my side bolts, you know, they're lined up about as good as they're going to get, and they'll fit fine. But you get up here, you know, we start getting a little sloppy. This will go in, this will go in. But look at this one, guys. It's a good half the hole. And the beat all, and I knew this from the get-go. You can see the gap right there for where this pan rail's not straight. And I've straightened on it a little bit. And it's not because it's hitting on anything in here, but it's going to take some tweaking. Even with the new gasket, it's going to take some tweaks. But all the other bow holes, they line up pretty okay. But I was wanting to get the pan at least bolt done tonight. I do have the time cover on. I kind of skipped over that. And, it's pretty basic stuff, guys. I just spared just a translucent layer RTV on both sides and bolted it on. And I figured I'd start on this oil pan. I was going to, video this process. And I'm glad I mocked it up before I started the camera, because that's just some awesome, nice words, when I start this. So I guess we're at a stopping point for tonight. So, that means I could keep adding to this video, or I could go ahead and publish it. I'm probably just going to go ahead and publish it, because there's a car show tomorrow, or at least a cruise in, and I'd like to go to it. I don't know if that's going to happen, but, we're kind of at this point. So, if you haven't yet, make sure you like this video, share it with your friends, and most importantly, if you're not a subscriber, hit that subscribe button, because it helps the channel to grow. Don't forget about the Purple Power giveaway that I mentioned earlier in this video. Make sure you comment down in the comments below to get entered. I'm going to leave that up for 1 week before I start, picking names. So, till next time, guys, I'll see you at the next video, and thanks for watching. And hopefully, this motor will be blue. I'll probably drop it short when I do paint it. That way everybody's updated. So, till next time, guys. See you then. Thanks.